Hard work versus Harvard. You've probably heard this phrase, or at least some version of it. And in this explainer, we're going to unpack how this simple line is so much more than just a slogan. It's actually the public face of a very deliberate political strategy, one designed to completely reshape how we think about power and expertise.
I mean, it's simple, right? It's memorable, and it instantly creates a conflict between two totally different ideas of what's valuable. On one side, you've got the grit and sweat of everyday effort, and on the other, the fancy pedigree of an elite education. So, that brings us to the big question we're tackling today. Is this just smart, catchy marketing for an election? Or does it point to something way bigger? A fundamental shift in the very logic of how a country is governed?
And here it is. This is the crucial insight from our source material. The phrase itself isn't the point. It's just the tip of the iceberg. The real thing to understand is what's called a governing logic, a full-on strategy meant to swap out the authority of experts for the authority of, well, moral purpose.
Okay, so let's break down how this actually works. The whole thing is incredibly effective because it frames a powerful but, and this is key, ultimately false choice for the public.
Just take a look at this table. On the surface, the choice seems really clear. Do you value effort or pedigree, sincerity or credentials? But what our source argues is that the real choice, the one happening behind the curtain, is between performing authenticity and actually integrating real expertise. It's a pivot away from specialized knowledge toward what feels like the right moral intention.
But why? Why would any government want to sideline expertise? Well, think about it. Expert advice is almost never simple. It's messy, it's full of nuance, probabilities, and doubt, and for a style of leadership that's all about projecting absolute strength and certainty, that kind of complexity isn't a tool for making better decisions, it's seen as a roadblock to getting things done.
So, okay, if it's a false choice, why does it work so well? How exactly do you manage to push real expertise to the sidelines in practice? Well, this brings us to the playbook itself. Our source lays out the specific, systematic steps that are used to basically delegitimize expert authority in the eyes of the public. Here's how it's done. Let's say an expert, an economist, a scientist, whoever, comes out and critiques a new policy. The argument isn't debated on its merits. No. Instead, the critic themselves gets reframed. Suddenly, they're an out-of-touch elitist, or maybe they're a pawn for foreign interests, or a political saboteur, or, the classic, they just don't understand the ground reality. See what's happening? The substance gets ignored, and the person's motive gets attacked. Think about it this way. For a long time, the main question you'd ask about any policy was pretty straightforward. Is it working? Is the data showing success? Are we getting the results we wanted?
But this governing logic just flips the whole script. The question is no longer about the policy's outcome. The new question is, who is this person questioning it, and what's their real agenda? The entire focus shifts from evidence to identity, from results to loyalty.
So when you push expertise out, something has to fill that vacuum, and that something is moral certainty. Policies get justified based on their noble goals. We're fighting corruption, or we're restoring national pride. The why becomes way more important than the how, or even the actual results.
And if you follow this to its logical conclusion, you end up in a system where being firm and unwavering is valued more than anything else. Admitting a mistake or changing your mind based on new data, that gets framed as weakness. Sticking to your guns, even if the plan is clearly failing, gets framed as strength.
And this leads to a really fascinating paradox. The source points out that expertise doesn't actually go away. Behind the scenes, specialists are still totally essential to make government work. The paradox is that they are relied on in private, while at the same time they're publicly called a threat. They become a tool you use, but you never let that tool question your big story. So what happens when this kind of logic takes hold over the long term? I mean, this isn't just a communications trick. It has real, deep, and lasting consequences for a country's institutions and for democracy itself. Our source has a great phrase for this, a public pedagogy of distrust. It's like a nationwide lesson in how to be skeptical of knowledge. It teaches people three main things. First, simple answers are always better than complex ones. Second, when experts disagree with each other, it's not a sign of a hard problem, it's a sign that they're all confused. And third, your gut feeling is a better guide than any rigorous analysis. And this disconnect between intent and reality has huge consequences. As you can see here, policies get justified by their good intentions. But when the actual results are bad, that moral framing is used to just rewrite reality. A policy failure becomes a noble sacrifice. Any legitimate criticism gets brushed off as being in bad faith. And those crucial feedback loops a government needs to fix its own mistakes, they just get completely broken.
A huge casualty in all of this is data itself. When the official numbers, the statistics, become inconvenient for the official story, trust in those numbers is deliberately undermined. And this makes governing almost impossible. Because if you can't even agree on the basic facts, how can you ever hope to solve the problems?
And this leads to such a critical insight. The kind of resentment this strategy stirs up is like a blunt instrument. When you teach people to distrust experts as a category, you don't just get rid of the bad or biased ones. You end up destroying public trust in the vital, necessary expertise that any modern society absolutely needs to function.
So what's the ultimate goal here? What is this all for? Well, according to our source, despite all the humble talk about hard work, this was never, ever about humility.
And look, this whole approach works so well because it taps into a very real feeling. There is often a completely justified resentment that people feel towards elites who seem out of touch with their everyday lives. This strategy just takes that genuine feeling and weaponizes it.
And this is really the heart of the matter. The whole point of setting up hard work against Harvard was about one thing: control. Specifically, control over the narrative, control over who gets to say what's real. When good intentions are the only thing that matters, the leader becomes the only one who can define success, and actual evidence becomes totally irrelevant.
Which leads us to our final, and maybe the most important question that this whole analysis raises. What is the long-term price a society pays when its people are encouraged to stop using their own critical judgment and are instead just asked to believe?
Because in the end, our source leaves us with this pretty powerful warning. Knowledge isn't some elite luxury. It's a democratic necessity. And a society that starts to treat knowledge as the enemy eventually and inevitably loses the very ability to govern itself.